Hello and welcome to the Tabletop Gaming Magazine podcast. I'm Chris Eggett, the editor of the magazine, and today we're going to jump straight into an interview with Pádraig Murphy, the production lead on the Enemy Within campaign at Cubicle 7, to talk about the newest instalment of that campaign, which is the Horned Rat. So we're going to talk about why Ratmen are so good, why the Horned Rat is an interesting deity, as well as the sort of bring up to speed with where we are in the campaigns. So enjoy. Can you introduce yourself and tell me who you are, what is a Horned Rat, and what's its problem?
It doesn't have any problems. It has a lot of solutions. It's just some people don't like its methods. Well, I'm Pádraig Murphy, and I'm the producer on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay for Cubicle 7 games. This is the 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. It's been out since, I think, 2018. And at the moment, we are coming to the close of our epic campaign, The Enemy Within. And, of course, you're referencing Part 4, The Horned Rat, which just released in PDF and will be in stores, soon, TM, I think Q1 next year.
Yeah, so the Horned Rat is part of the Enemy Within campaign, which is this huge campaign that's been going on. When did it start?
So initially, the Enemy Within began with 1st edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and that would have been the very late 80s that the campaign actually started. So it begins with what we've called Enemy in Shadows, which kind of combines two previous installments of the campaign bundled together. It is indeed epic. It's a 5-book campaign, 5 160-page books, and to make it extra exciting, we also decided to do a companion series of books. So every part of the campaign has its own companion book, an additional 128 pages of extra content, some neat rules stuff, new NPCs, different challenges. And they also contain what we're calling the Director's Cut material, which this is the 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and I think the 3rd edition of the Enemy Within. So it includes kind of the wisdom that has been gathered over the years about, what its strengths are, where you can, you might need some help as a GM, the common pitfalls, how to make it more challenging and more interesting and more divisive with the party. And that's all packed into the collector's edition. So if you want to get the ultimate experience, it's actually a 10-book campaign. So yeah, it's pretty epic.
Yeah, it's huge. It's my shelf of RPGs is at this point like quite a lot of fantasy roleplay.
Our aim is to buckle bookshelves, make some money for IKEA. That's what we're here to do.
Okay, so would you like to bring us up to speed? Where are we in the campaign? And where should our players be? Because obviously players go where they like. You can't tell them what to do really. And
sure. Well, what I'll do is I'll give a more compressed bit of everything, and then we can find the Horned Rat. Yeah. So the players the players become the targets of suspicion for one of the cults of the Ruinous Powers, which kind of eats away at the fabric of the Empire, and no matter what they do, it's hard to get them off your back, basically. And very quickly, most parties come to the conclusion that, well, this needs to be solved if I'm ever going to have peace in my life again. The early stages of the plot take you through the Reichland, and they take you up and down the Reich. You may get your own barge, even take up a life as a trader briefly. And ultimately, you will end up on the road to Middenheim, which is where kind of Part 3 and a good chunk of Part 4, the Horned Rat, take place. And Middenheim is the chosen city of Ulrich, the god of war, winter, and wolves. It's built on the Fauschlag, which is like a huge plateau, turning the whole city into this kind of almost impregnable fortress. And it's indeed has been a fortress in a lot of different wars, civil wars and wars against chaos and similar. And in Power Behind the Throne, you find that the kind of infiltration of the upper classes of the Empire is well underway. And if somebody doesn't do something about it, it could be quite a disaster. So during the events of Part 3, Power Behind the Throne, you kind of become involved with the upper classes in Middenheim, maybe gaining their favor or at least becoming persons of note or notoriety to them. And from that position, you're led into the Horned Rat, which is Part 4, which is out just now and is a very exciting piece of the Enemy Within, because while there have been previous versions of the Enemy Within, Part 4 traditionally has been a book called Something Rotten in Kislev, which is a great piece of the adventure, but it took players out of the Empire And the way we see the last parts of The Enemy Within, it needs to remain very focused on the Empire and on the perils the Empire faces, both from without and within. So our part 4 that we worked on, and which was kind of originated by Graham Davies, one of the authors who'd worked on the original Enemy Within series, focuses very heavily on the Skaven, who are a kind of nefarious threat eating away. They're humanoid ratmen, if people aren't familiar. They're eating away at the very foundations of the Empire, quite literally in some cases, from below the tunnels below. And yeah, they're a great enemy. They mix kind of horror and just a touch of humor in a way that I think is very Warhammer. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I was going to say, a sort of improvised question I was just going to ask there is, what's so good about Skaven? Because I do think they are like emblematic of Warhammer. I think Skaven, sort of slightly silly, slightly weird creatures with like tons of flavour, and also in the sense of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, they're kind of mucky. And that's kind of good. That's kind of the flavour of the whole game, really.
Yeah, I think they're great for a number of reasons, and I mean, I could talk about this for a while, so you're going to have to cut me off at the point where you're like, that was enough. I think they're brilliant for a few reasons. I personally like them because a lot of factions in the Warhammer world are like, so Chaos generally is trying to tear everything down, and it feels like the win condition for Chaos is this like briefly corrupt, hedonistic, violent, changeable world followed by nothing because it ends. But the Skaven aren't trying to destroy everything. They just want to tear down the empire and in general all of the dominions and countries and nations of the surface world. Tear those down to their right place, which is beneath the hoof, beneath the paw of the Skaven, and build an empire of their own. And I like that. I like that they're trying to build something. It was horrible and terrifying and awful, but to me, it makes them very relatable because that's the sort of thing that has driven civilizations throughout all of human history. So it makes it quite relatable to me. Whereas, just wanting to destroy everything makes perfect sense for so many factions, but it's not always inherently as relatable.
Yeah.
So I like the Skaven for that reason. I like I do like the mixture of they can be a little bit silly sometimes. I think that comes out of a lot of great Black Library books as well. I mean, Gotrek and Felix and everything that happens in Nuln is a great example of that. But we made a very conscious decision at the beginning of the development of the Horned Rat that yes, they are silly, but they're kind of silly and funny to the players, not the characters. Mm-hmm. So, in the same way that the Skaven can be a bit ridiculous to the reader of a Gotrek and Felix book, but they're actually terrifying if you have to live with them. Like they're underneath everything. Nobody really believes in them. They have magic and technology that borders on science fiction to us. So never mind what it would be like to, someone who's used to just barely getting used to gunpowder and steam tanks comes across like a doom wheel or a skitter, a skittergate. Like those are insane pieces of technology. So they're not silly to, if you have to live in the old world, they're not silly to the characters. So we made a very conscious decision to play up the fact that actually a society of rat-like humanoids living underneath the Empire is terrifying. And that's a serious issue that needs to be dealt with. And the fact that nobody really believes in them just makes them all the more horrifying.
That's it. Yeah, because it's a little bit like the zombie paradox, right? I say paradox, so I've made that sound better than it is, or like a thing. But the thing is, we all think of zombies. Zombies are your default enemy, right? Because you can show a zombie having its head blown off and that sort of thing. That's fine, that sort of thing. But the actual, zombies are actually the most horrific thing possible. If it's someone if it's if it's like something relatable in your life, if it's a real human being, if it's not just a pixel on the screen. And it's a little bit like that, isn't it? Because they have this it is a horrifying idea, like a rat person who lives in your walls or whatever.
Yes.
I mean, you'd have to have quite big walls because they're quite big, aren't they? Really, they're not.
Everything's big in Warhammer. It's fine. There's room in the walls and the cellars for plenty of Skaven.
So yeah, I'm glad you've got as much love for it as I do. And also, as you say, the horned rat as a god is much more relatable because there's no metaphysics there. There's no, we're not worried about that. It's
not yet. That's sticking to the old world. Yes, I take your point.
Yeah, which I like. I like that a lot. I think it's just, as you say, relatable and very sort of realistic, and makes the threat in these games feel a lot more grounded, I think.
I mean, I think the ultimate thing that the Horned Rat has done to make the Skaven more terrifying is like united them ultimately, because they've obviously existed for a long, long time, but the Under Empire has only grown to what it is now, I think, because of the Grey Seers and the kind of second coming of the Horned Rat that united their society. So I mean, they're terrifying on that level as well, because even though they're riven with backstabbing and plots and intrigue, they ultimately are, relatively unified. Broadly speaking, so I mean, we do delve into the backstabbing as well, because it's such an iconic part of them. And if you get the companion, you will find that there are tons of different factions and small groups to throw in to the Horned Rat, all of which have their own agenda, some of which will be trying to undermine the the main the big bad guy, let's say, and could ultimately even help the characters a little bit, and then kill them and eat them afterwards, but briefly be of assistance.
Excellent. So this is the penultimate book.
Yes.
The question I've got here is, what are we setting up for? I don't think you can actually answer that. But
we're setting up for the ultimate book, which is of course. No, I mean, I can speak in general terms, and I could certainly talk a little bit about some of the design ethos on Empire and Ruins, which is part 5. So something we did with the Horned Rat was kept it in the Empire. And I think what the Enemy Within ultimately is the corruption and danger coming from within, and how if you're the nobility, the aristocracy, the ruling class, and all the ruling apparatus of state, if those become compromised, then that's bad for every level of society. And the Skaven are actually an outcropping of that, because I mean, if everything was functioning as it should be, the Empire would not be ignoring Skaven and would not be they wouldn't be able to kind of marshal the power they have inside the Empire. So in the same way that like the more direct chaos worshipping cults can kind of thrive underneath that general ignorance, so do the Skaven. So I think that they make a good kind of part, a more integrated part of the campaign. But it also serves the original purpose that Something Wrong in Kislev did, which was take the players away for a little bit, give them something to play in, a kind of a sandbox that they can get engaged with and be involved in for a little while events in the general meta plot advance. And the main things that are advancing throughout the Enemy Within is civil strife in the Empire is starting to grow. So we have these rumor sections throughout the books that kind of build on that, and you'll hear things that like, a noble von Tasnik's gone missing in the mountains. Oslan and Talabek land are kind of, they're throwing a lot of shade about why that happened. And that's dropped early on, and you find out, as the rumors go on, you hear more and more about how the Empire, and particularly this kind of Ulrican and Sigmarite divide, because it is a polytheistic nation, they have lots of different gods, and because you believe in one, it doesn't mean that you think the others don't exist. It just means that they're not maybe the main focus of your worship. So you can, you have Sigmar and Ulric, Sigmar being the kind of god of the Empire, Ulric being an older god and a probably more primal god in many ways. War, winter, and wolves are very important if those are the things you live with in your life. Those two deities are kind of have coexisted, but thanks to the machinations of somebody, their followers are starting to kind of knock heads a little bit more. And by the time you get to Empire and Ruins, that's becoming a real problem. And it's clear that it needs to be addressed, at a diplomatic level. And because the players have become quite established in Middenheim, they will get to be a part of that and see that break down and influence it, and in the same way that we're kind of tracking, throughout the Horned Rat, the actions you undertake influence how much people believe or don't believe in the Skaven. In the same way, the players' actions throughout Empire and Ruins change how people view them. Like, are they a unifying force? Are they a kind of a pro-Middenheim sort of Ulrican partisan force? Or are they, do they remember their roots in the Reichland where the campaign started, and they're seen more as a kind of a southern Sigmarite influence? So that's tracked throughout and has like subtle influences on reactions to them and, ultimately how the main plot might go. So what we've done with part 5 is try to take the best bits of Empire in Flames and kind of earlier conclusions to the campaign, bring in new ideas, and Graham had some like really striking notions on exactly how to manage this, and how to bring it to a satisfying conclusion. And we hope it does that. It calls back to earlier threads in a way that I think, picks them up and brings them to a conclusion that I think is really worthwhile and will be really satisfying to anyone who's played all 5 parts. They're going to like to see like characters literally from Enemy Shadows return in a meaningful way that makes sense. And ultimately, like, some of the plot beats have been the ones that were satisfying. I think in older ones, the most satisfying ones are still there. And I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to ultimately decide the fate of the Empire. And if people are playing it, they should know that we've written a few different endings and given guidance on more in the companion. So going into this as a player, you should be aware that your GM has every possibility to end this in a terrible way, or a bad way, or an okay way, or a good way. There are multiple things that can happen. So like the stakes throughout it are real. Don't feel that because you've played 4 campaigns, the GM's going to go easy on you and let this be a win. Not at all. It can end terribly.
Brilliant. Anyone gets me when they say there's always the opportunity of it ending terribly. I think
there has to be,
there has to be. And in fact, yeah, you're right. Sorry, on like a writing level, yes, it has to be, and a game level, it has to be. But I think so often we're focused on the power play. How the players going to feel, and just the thing of like, it can all go wrong. You can do this wrong. I love it. I've dipped into the book, and I've seen that there's a sort of like nice opening free-form structure at the beginning, where there's a lot of stuff you can do at the start of the Horns, right? So can you talk to me a bit about why you set it up in that way, or what the goals are there, and maybe give a little bit of a flavour about the kind of good and bad choices people can make in terms of their investigations?
Yes, well, there's a couple of reasons for it. So it's something that we had in the initial draft of the Horned Rat, that section wasn't really there. So it came out of play testing, and about like kind of some read-throughs we did internally, where we were kind of replicating the player experience and coming off playing Power Behind the Throne, making sure that play testing some of the additions we suggested and so on. So we would just come off that, and what we realized had happened was everyone had become attached to 2 main things. One was ending this cult really following up on Power Behind the Throne, not going, the big bag was defeated, just draw a curtain on it and move on, it's okay. They really wanted to go in and root out every last vestige of that influence, which I think was very understandable. And the other one was they were quite attached to the setting of Middenheim, and as we were as developers as well, because we just done Power Behind the Throne, the Power Behind the Throne companion, and the Middenheim City, the White Wolf book. So that was, that's 3 sizable books on this place, ultimately to focus quite a lot on Middenheim. And we realized that after 1 game, we weren't really ready to leave it behind. And we felt that the characters probably would feel that way as well, because Middenheim is where you have the opportunity to improve your social standing in the Empire, which is, and in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, your social standing means a lot. Like the class struggle is one of the main themes of 4th edition. And having the chance to climb that ladder gives you a lot of more opportunities. So we didn't think people were ready to leave it behind quite so quickly and head off to confront this menace elsewhere. So we came up with this idea that there were a lot of threads kind of hanging that you might want to pursue. We'd sown a little bit in Power Behind the Throne about the Skaven influence, and we left kind of some of this cult activities, some of the cult elements were still around. And we decided to give players the opportunity to, okay, you want to deal with all of the cults in Middenheim? Go for it, do it. We've worked out, who's there, who's in various positions. This is what they're doing. They're scrambling to put things back together. But if you don't do something about it, they will put things back together. They're a cult that's endured probably for centuries. They're, the chaos god that they worship is some one of plots and counterplots. So don't think they're not ready for this. So what you get to do is someone comes along and they says, listen, you dealt with some stuff there. Do you want to keep dealing with it? Because here's some things that I've found that might be of interest to you, and I don't know who to trust anymore. But you people have proven yourself to at least have an agenda that matches up with ours. So you get that experience in Middenheim. And I mean, you can mess up like quite badly if you don't chase everything up. That kind of what we call the Skaven evidence tracker, that if you mess up badly enough, you can make people believe less in the Skaven, depending on some of your interactions.
Just wonderful. Sorry, can you take us through the Skaven evidence tracker?
Yeah, the Skaven evidence tracker. So the thing that's happening in the background with the GM, at no point are they going to say to you, "Oh, +1 on the Skaven," but depending on your actions, you can increase general local belief in the Skaven beyond what it is by the default kind of. Because of course, like one of the previous graphs at Middenheim is Madrid's Skaven Slayer. So a lot of people are like, well, where does that name come from? So people in Middenheim are aware that, yeah, the Skaven might have been a thing once, but 1,000 years ago. They're not anymore. They were wiped out. We had a whole war about it. They're gone. Or some people might say, no, they never existed at all. It's myth, like it's too long ago. And you can start to chip away at that. And we've gone through every kind of major NPC in Middenheim and throughout the campaign, or throughout the scenario, the relevant part, and given their take on Skaven, what they believe and so on. Obviously, dwarfs generally are reliable people. Like, they can't ignore them the way your average Imperial human can. So, but you can start, as I said, chipping away at the disbelief, or you can make it worse if you start like throwing around accusations and pulling out evidence, and then you start to see some of the mechanisms of how the Skaven actually maintain that masquerade, which I think is something that we really wanted to address, because it's quite not implausible, but you do wonder, like, how do they keep this thing under wraps when we know that, like, maybe Talia, Bretonia don't have quite the same doubt about Skaven that the Empire does. So how are they keeping it under wraps? And you see a little bit of that, which I think is fun.
Can you reveal a little bit of how they do that, or is that too spoilery?
Oh well,
because that's just me being interested now.
Well, continuing the themes of the Enemy Within in general, which is the apparatus of power becomes corrupt. They corrupt the apparatus of power.
Okay.
They look to human vice, which Skaven understand vice quite well, and they don't always totally get humans, but they know that if you throw gold at them, which is worthless to Skaven, Warpstone is their thing. If you throw gold at the average human, they'll just do things for you. So there's some Skaven who are aware of that, and they maintain their own sort of cult inside the Empire, which is explored in the book to a degree, and you get some important NPCs, and then the companion gives you more information on them. And yeah, I mean, that's all. I don't want to go too spoilery, but be careful who you trust, and keep an eye on everybody, and never be. There's no such thing as being too paranoid. The Skaven really do want to get you. There are rats in the walls.
See, you're selling it really hard. It's great, because that gets me. Just come back to that initial sort of freeform part of the game. So there's also kind of like, you're up against time as well, aren't you, in some way?
Yeah. So we taught a little bit about how to do this as well, and because it can be troublesome in an RPG. I find it troublesome to keep track of like days and weeks, because sometimes players need to have a shopping day, or they need to have a little bit of downtime because they've been stabbed a lot, and that has to be addressed, for mechanical gameplay reasons. So it can be a bit tough that way. So what we decided to do was, there are certain, you're kind of given these clues and more arise during the course of your investigations, and you can go in multiple different directions. And what we tried to do was have it that the thing you left till the end that you decided was the lowest priority, whatever that was, there's kind of a bad outcome for everything, where, you didn't look into that? The Skaven came along, covered up all the evidence. That's all gone now. Good luck. Or you needed to speak to those people, but that's just, been dealt with. That person has gone missing, or they're dead, or there's a shadowy assassin stalking you now. I guess you should have paid more attention. So it's not to punish players. It's not to punish players no matter what they do, but it's just to kind of give them. It's to make the order that they do the things in and what their priorities are have a meaningful impact on things. Right. So whatever you leave to the bottom of your priority queue is probably going to suffer because of that, but that's a choice you made, so you need to be able to deal with the consequences.
Yeah, that's great. I like that a lot, just because it adds so much like flavor to the thing, and it's something, it's just the reality of it as well.
It is the reality of it, and I think it lines up with what Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is, which is that there is no like perfect outcome usually. It's very hard to get that heroic moment without a caveat, where it's like, the medal ceremony at the end of Star Wars, where everyone just goes, well done, here's your medal. You can have that, but in the background you have to have a scheming plotter, or somebody who's about to manipulate you based on that, or you couldn't solve it all because no one could. There is a section in it where we also kind of say, well, if you keep delving too deep, you will all die. Like there's no, you can't fight the whole Under Empire. You know, you can't end all the Skaven menace completely. Like it's just out of scope for what a few people are capable of, and you need to be able to live with the fact that the world is imperfect and you can only improve it in small ways.
I was going to ask you, for those who don't know about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplayer, whether you could give a little bit of a sense of it, but I think you just have.
Yeah, I mean, that is what it's about. It's grim and perilous roleplay. Oh, excuse me, which is what we kind of have as an ongoing tagline. And I think that is the thing that's different about it. Like, it can be really horrible and brutal. But I think what saves that from being this like very kind of downer as an experience is it has a sense of humor about itself, and it knows what it is in the world, kind of knows what it is. And I think that's the thing that keeps the people in the old world going, which is that, like, well, all this horrible stuff happened and there was a plague and a war and apparently Skaven are real, but you can go down to the pub afterwards and have a drink and kind of talk about it and be like, well, this was awful, but at least, you know, we're holding things together roughly. And I think that is the experience the players have as well, you know, and it's reflected in different mechanics. Like, you can have a very bad experience that leaves that you didn't just lose hit points, like you've broken a limb and you're going to be at a penalty for months of game time, because that's what happens when you break your arm, you know, or lose some fingers. It's something you have to deal with now. Yeah. And I think when you wrestle victory from the jaws of all of that kind of grind, that it's all the more meaningful for it.
Fabulous. Okay, so I've got my standard question here as well, which is what's next?
So what is next? Then the very next thing up will be Archives of the Empire 2. So Archives of the Empire is our kind of grab bag of articles that, you know, didn't fit somewhere else, or they're about a topic that the big book is a little while out. So the last Archives of the Empire focused on the Lower Lorne, which is a wood elf domain to the northwest of the Empire. It focused on the Mootland and Halflings, which gave like some nice new player options there, and explored the Moot in a way that hasn't really been explored before in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And it focused a little bit on some dwarf stuff, and we also had some new careers for elves, dwarves, and halflings in there, including the Halfling Badger Rider, which has been more popular than I ever expected.
How would you think that wouldn't be maybe the most popular thing?
Do you know, we were making up things that halflings tell outsiders as a joke, and we were like, oh, Halfling Badger Riders, they totally have badger cavalry. That's a thing they tell people, you know, on this idea of the Halfling Grand Tour, which is where they lead you to the Moot and take all your money, basically. But, you know, they show you a good time, but it is kind of everyone, you know, the Halflings are all in on it. So they're kind of like, oh, he's on the Grand Tour. And whatever the tour guide says, everyone's like, yeah, that's true. And it becomes a game of like, what will they believe? So that's what the Badger Riders were. And then our fabulous licensing partner at Games Workshop, seeing the art we had done for the Badger Rider, was like, oh, I can't wait to play one. This is brilliant. Badgers, that's great. So it kind of became a sort of a, just got legs, 3 badger legs, and off it ran. So it's left me in the position where I now need to publish stats for a badger mount because people didn't have them because it was a joke. I got to get that in. So Archives of the Empire 2 is that kind of grab bag of exciting topics. There's a ton of ogre stuff in there. There's rules for mass combat. There's a section on the Great Hospice, which is a place of rest and recuperation your character can go to when the grind of the world has taken them down, and you can meet some of the people there. It features it's an interesting location, basically, just north of Altdorf. And so a few little extra bits and pieces as well I think people will like. So some nice, a new minor addition for character creation too, which is where you pick a star sign that kind of might or might not influence your character if you believe in that sort of thing.
Where can we find you if you like to be found?
Cubicle 7 loves to be found, so you can find Cubicle 7 on Twitter and Facebook and at cubicle7games.com. We have a newsletter, and if you subscribe to that, you'll keep up to date with not just Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, but also Warhammer Age of Sigmar and Wrath and Glory, and all of our other exciting role-playing game products. As well as we have a card game coming out called Electric Counts, which is set in the old world, and is done as a kind of a companion in-game card game sort of thing, which I'm really excited about because it's the first like physical non-computer game, non-role-playing game, old world a game that will be out for a while, basically. And it's nice to keep we're just keeping that little torch of the old world burning until Games Workshop gets back to it with their what will no doubt be very exciting contributions. So expect to see.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. I thought it was a really, when I saw that news, I thought it was a really interesting way to go.
Yeah, well, it grew. It's something that we're kind of. All the cards are done so they feel a little bit in world, and it was something that we kind of decided would be a nice companion piece to the role playing game. But as well as that, it was a very natural bit to develop because we have all this art that Cubicle 7 do, and we have all the fantastic Games Workshop art from down the years in the old world, and it was an opportunity to kind of bring some of that to the fore again, along with a few new pieces that you might go on to see in the role playing game on the cover of new exciting books as well. So yeah, and it's a lot of fun. We've been playing it online on using online tools to play test it, which was fun. But we finally got some of our first in-person games of it recently with mock card sets, and it was really enjoyable. So a nice lunchtime game.
That's great. I do have a soft spot for games that they either look like they should be, or in this case they're actually designed to be played in a fantasy world, as in you go into a tavern in a fantasy world and you see people playing this game. I think there's a few sort of abstract war games, things like that.
Yeah.
Well, I think yes, this one fits with. I can hear a lute already
in the background. Yeah, that was it. I think the tagline on the box is banned in taverns from Talabheim to Altdorf or something like that. Because, we also like the idea. We were seeing it the same way, and then we were like, oh god, though, if you were pretending to be an electrocount claiming the throne, is that treason? In a card game? So yeah, I don't think you'd whip it out in front of every passing noble, but I think it's something that the middle class, the burghers, enjoy.
Absolutely, one for the gutters.
Yes, yeah.
Lovely. Thank you for speaking to me today.
Not at all. Thank you for having me. A pleasure.